Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. David Minster NA2AA has been the CEO of the ARRL now for nearly 3 years. Prior to that, he was working in industry for companies like Unilever and David Yurman Company. He's built a solid reputation as a software engineer, chief information officer, and chief executive officer, and clearly a great choice to lead the ARRL, the world's largest ham radio organization, into the future. He's got a very busy schedule, so I'm very pleased that he was able to join me today. Thank you. I appreciate you being here, David.
It's great to be with you.
So, speaking of a busy schedule, I'm not exaggerating when I say that over the past 30 days, I think you've been to Dayton, you've been to Germany, you've been to the West Coast to a Seattle show. This must be a rigorous expectation for you to be everywhere at once.
It's a complicated job. There was a time where the organization had both a CEO and a COO, so that you had a COO that was running day-to-day operations and a CEO who was working with the board and doing outreach and the rest of that. And the board, I'm guessing maybe 7 years ago or so at this point, combined the two positions, and it's a handful. The other thing with COVID and the advent of virtual meetings, we meet on Zoom regularly. In fact, I will come home for dinner every night, and my wife will not ask me how my day was. She'll say, "Do you have a Zoom call tonight?" So, but it's a great job. I appreciate your kind comments. And my career path and my love for amateur radio, and not getting too focused on any one aspect of radio, having really dabbled in pretty much everything other than really getting into the hardcore elements of MCOM. And even though I have made one EME contact sort of accidentally, never really getting into EME, the sort of the rest of the hobby I've had a good bit of interest and exposure to. So coming into ARRL to manage the business side, and also to be able to help inspire staff and hopefully inspire members with regards to being radioactive in the hobby has sort of been my focus.
Well, I've got to say, I never realized that the job was combined as a CEO and COO. And I certainly do understand the expectation for outward facing for a CEO. And you're combining that with all the inward-facing work also, so I'm duly impressed. Before we get into more of that, I'm really curious how your prior work experience has impacted your ability to do this job effectively. It's an impressive resume, David. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's aspects of my career that, frankly, I won't be able to take advantage of. I spent a lot of time in Asia working in supply chain. In terms of taking a $100 million jewelry company and trying to grow it to $500 million. There was really no way to do that without going global. So I spent an awful lot of time. My old passport, I think, has two extensions in it, and I have more passport stamps from Hong Kong, China, and India than you can imagine. But that sort of global sourcing is not something that's been important. The one part of my background, beyond just being a business operator and understanding technology and so forth, every business has a culture. And when you take a look at companies that have grown well, like Cisco is a good example. When you take a look at a company like Cisco that grew through acquisition, one of their key factors in understanding whether they were going to take on a business or not was, would the cultures clash, or would the companies be able to work well together from the get-go? And frankly, when I came into ARRL as a lifelong member and passionate fan of the organization, when I came in, I was very, very surprised at some of the cultural problems that existed within the business. I had been frankly warned about some culture issues related to the board. And as maybe one of the things that we can touch on today as we're talking is the really the negative impact that elements of social media are having on the hobby that are, again, cultural in nature. We're a really small community. We're a small company. We're a small membership. Amateur radio as a whole is a small community. We really don't have the luxury of having cultural problems and introducing cultural problems into an area where we've got bigger problems to solve. So from the outset, I've been very focused on culture, and a lot of that had to do with the experience that I had at Unilever. Working at Unilever for some 14 years. Unilever was a portfolio of companies, about 500 companies in about 100 countries, and you, as a business, a global business, had to figure out how to work with each other. And they've been a business that's been around for more than a century. They continue to thrive as a consumer goods business. And I believe that it's really rooted in the fact that they've developed this performance culture and protection of the brand that has allowed them to thrive for so long.
So, David, given your experience in the private sector and working for corporations, whatever possessed you to want to work for a 501c3 and all the things that go with that? And I think 501c3s are great, but coming from the private sector myself and trying to do volunteer work, it's such a different way of doing business. And frankly, I don't know that I'm built for it. But what when you looked in the mirror that morning, what drove you to make that decision to even throw your hat in the ring?
There were a bunch of factors. One factor is that my daughter, Catherine, has devoted her life to nonprofit work. From the major that she took at Cornell to the work that she's done for her entire career at the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. When you see the work that an organization has that's sort of myopic on a mission, and they devote everything, all their energy, all their passion to trying to fulfill that mission. The mission of for-profit organizations is to do one thing, and if any executive tells you differently, they're deluding themselves. You're in business to make money, period. You hear people today talk about pivoting. Well, pivoting just means what you were doing isn't working, so you better figure something out fast or you're not going to be in business anymore. With a nonprofit, that's not the case. Your mission may evolve over time. ARRL's been around since the early 1900s, and its mission has never changed, which is very simply stated to promote and protect amateur radio. That's what we do. We promote the hobby. There are things that we do that we do not make money on. So when I looked at sort of where my life was, right? So I'm coming into my 60s. I've been spending an awful lot of time on the road. The last sort of 5 years before I came to ARRL, I was an independent consultant. I was spending a lot of time in Asia. My wife can tell you, we came together right around the time that I had started my consulting business. And, she wasn't used to seeing me disappear for a couple of weeks, to go off to India or Hong Kong or China. So, COVID hit. And, there I am sitting at home, and everybody, just like everyone else, I'm sitting watching the TV, looking at the COVID death numbers climb every day, thinking about, where do I want my consulting practice to go? Where do I want my life to go? And right around the same time, it came to my attention that ARRL had lost its CEO. They had parted ways, and that they were doing a search. And so I reached out to my director, my Hudson division director, and said, is this a thing? Should I consider? Because I didn't know, right? I use the expression, I was just a member. What do I know? I see the website, I get my magazines, QST and NCJ, I participate in radio sport. I've got my awards, all of that. But I had no idea about what the internals of ARRL were all about. And so we exchanged a few emails, and I decided that it might be something interesting and fun to do. And actually, during my they had ARRL, and much to the credit of the board members that agreed to do this during the peak of COVID, you had board members and CEO candidates getting on airplanes, going to Denver to meet in person. The social distancing was taken very seriously. But anyway, I had 3 group interviews with board members, and there were other board members that couldn't come in and that were there virtually. But I was asked the question by Rick Roderick, and I believe this was the only question he asked me, while the board members continued the interview. He said, if you did wind up getting into this position, how many years would you give us? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm just about 60. I'll give you 10 years. And that's it. Then it's time for me to go and build my dream station and go lay on a beach or something, who knows? But so I'm, as you said at the outset, I'm sort of just wrapping up my 3rd year. And I have found the job to be extremely rewarding. I love hearing from members. I love hearing the stories about how important amateur radio has been to their lives and to their careers. That's really what keeps me going and keeps me engaged 7 days a week to work for the membership.
So, David, you've already alluded to, I don't think you used the word surprised, but you've alluded to cultural issues inside of the ARRL. What were the surprises that you experienced when you came aboard, if you can share those with us?
Well, one was actually driven by COVID, right? Which was, as an employer, we worked very, very hard to make sure that the employees could stay employed and could stay on the job servicing members. And so there were some technology hacks that we needed to do to make that work. Were they perfect? No, but as a nonprofit, you're coming from the for-profit world. If you've got a problem in for-profit, generally you throw money at it and make it go away. In nonprofit, you've got to be a lot more adept at using what you have to make things work. But, one of the things that I noticed, and I think a lot of this had to do with the turnover in the CEO office before I got here. The sense that I got is that people just weren't fully engaged. They were waiting for the next shoe to fall. And I needed to be able to instill in them the thought that we had gotten to a place of stability and that we needed to change the culture to one of yes. In fact, it was the first column I ever wrote. It was called The Culture of Yes. It was far too easy for people in the building to just say no. No, we don't do that. Well, as soon as you say no, you can move on to the next thing. It's not the quantity of the responses that you handle. It's the quality of the work that you do for the membership. And so being able to start from a position of yes. I'll give you a perfect example. We love to have our traditions. And when we do things that are untraditional, people tend not to react entirely well to them. So we have an award called the Triple Play Award. And if you achieve this plaque and you get it, which I did, again, just as a member, I call it the cheese plate. It looks like some nebulous piece of plastic with some kind of a label stuck to it. And it doesn't go with the rest of the plaques on the wall. So I had a member reach out and say, look, I just got a plaque. It doesn't match my other plaques. Now, it wasn't the It wasn't the triple play plaque. But anyway, I got everybody together who was sort of involved in this and said, look, can we just get this guy the old style plaque so that it'll line up with the rest of what he's got hanging on his wall? And the very first answer was no. It's like, get it, right? Like, I'm not asking if we can do this. I'm asking how we do this. So if we got all the way down the road and found out that whatever, that ceramic plate isn't available anymore, we can't, I get that. But going in and saying no was a complete non-starter. So one of the things that I hope that I've influenced in the building here is that we really do listen to members and try to come at everything with an open mind, see what we can do. And if we get all the way down the road and decide we can't do that, then at least we've made an effort and we can talk about it.
David, you touch upon something that I think is really critical for the hobby. Our hobby is known as the old timers, the people like myself that have been in it for a long time or just older. But we also all accept the fact that the future of ham radio are with the younger generation. So they must be in conflict. And I think that's what you're talking about. The people that are used to it happening this way for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades and want to keep it going the same. And then you've got, a lot of people that I've met, particularly through Parks on the Air, that are in their late 20s, early 30s, and they just see the world differently. How do you deal with that? How do you bring those two together? Because obviously we value the old timers. They bring a lot to the hobby, and I've learned a lot from them. But how do you and the ARRL balance that so that we're also learning from the 35-year-old software engineer?
So I was licensed in the 1970s, and when I came into amateur radio in the 1970s, people told me that it was an old man's sport and that the hobby was graying. Well, okay, we're going on 50 years now, right? And so, yes, this is an image that amateur radio has had for decades. When I came into the hobby in the 70s in high school, we didn't hang out with the gray-haired guys in the club. Our high school radio station, WA2UYB, was an active group of people. We had an old HW100. I would run between classes to go and try to work a contact or two on 20 CW. And my teachers were very generous. If I showed up a minute or two late, they knew that I was in the ham radio station making contacts, right? So we really created our own culture, our own interests. I wound up meeting some other teenagers online. We used to have a net on 15 meters after Saturday Night Live, and talk about the show. And one evening, a guy got on there and said, "What are you kids doing up at an ungodly hour?" And one of the guys said, "Well, you're checking into the ungodly net." So we started calling ourselves the Ungodly Net. But the point is that all those years ago, there were young people coming into the hobby. There were people saying that the hobby was aging out. I think the thing that has gotten between amateur radio and young people is, frankly, the internet and the cell phone. And what's happened is that where I used to go down on Saturday night and fire up my Hallicrafters twins and let the tubes warm up an hour before I was going to get on so that my SX101A didn't drift during the net, right? These guys can do a group call, a group Zoom call. They text each other during the shows, whatever they're watching. And there's also something that I see in young people today, which is because of being on 24 hours a day, there's sort of this baked in ADD where you want instant gratification. You're not going to invest a lot of time in things. You want to get in, you want to do it, and you want to move on to the next thing. You're going to come back, but it's just not, So when I look at contesting, for example, there have been efforts that I don't think work. with young people, which is to create these youth overlays. You know, back in the 1990s, I was very excited about the progress of video games, and got very into 3 or 4 of them as sort of the technology progressed. And it wasn't the video game itself; it was playing against other players. And so, getting on and beating the tar out of each other became a lot of fun. That kind of competition can and should be supported in the radio sport platforms that we offer today. If you get a handful of people in college that want to get on Saturday night, and instead of sitting and playing Call of Duty, they want to get on a remote station and they want to compete against each other for 6 hours, and they want to be able to define what is up on the live scoreboard. Can you actually see what band your competitors are on, or do you hide that? Do you show them how many multipliers the other players have, or do you hide that? Create the anxiety, create the excitement, and allow young people to get in and contest on their own terms and in their own time. And it's a very, very different way of looking at how people contest today. I've often said, think about talking to an 18, 19-year-old college student and say, listen, contest coming up this weekend, Friday night to Sunday night, 48 hours straight. You got to give me the full weekend. And in about 9 months, we'll tell you who won. These guys hear that, and it's just like, you got to be kidding me. What's up with you guys? Are you sending smoke signals between mountains? I mean, so culturally that doesn't match. One of the best things that I've done since coming to ARRL was hiring Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. Steve was a school teacher in Mississippi. He was a YouTuber. In fact, I'm a big fan of people that have small YouTube channels and are looking to grow them. My very first YouTube interview was on Steve's channel, which was a pretty modest channel at the time. And the long story short is I wanted Steve to do for ARRL and schools across the country what he was doing in Mississippi, which was integrating amateur radio into his curriculum, getting kids licensed, getting them radios, and getting them on the air. And he did a really phenomenal job. He's come in, he's hit the ground running. We're at teacher conventions now, teacher conferences. Our Teachers Institute, he's come in and re-engineered the program. He's now responsible for IARU Region 2 youth initiatives, so everything from the North Pole to the South Pole through North and South America in terms of youth, he's responsible for. So this is a really smart, really experienced go-getter that's coming in and knows. If you come to our booth at any of the major shows, you'll see Steve and his wife standing there talking to young people, and they're magnets, and they're energetic. So, we're focused on that. We understand we have to have a greater attention to how we integrate amateur radio into a STEM curriculum. So because if it's not relevant to a student or relevant to their parents, they're not going to get excited. It's just another thing. So we're working on that. But at the same time, I have members come up to me and say, you know what the definition of a young person is in amateur radio? Someone in their 50s who's about to retire and has lots of time and lots of money, and you should get all of those guys in their 50s licensed. Well, okay. I mean, that's another approach, right? And that's sort of what we do every day. But this renewed focus on young people, and also the partnership that we've developed with ARDC, where they have been extremely generous in providing funding to the ARRL Foundation for scholarships for young people. You've got one of our major donors, Ed Snyder, a ham here in Connecticut, has very generously given to the foundation. to create an endowment that supports a collegiate amateur radio initiative. They now call it the Collegiate Amateur Radio Program. I guess the kids didn't like it being an initiative, so they wanted it to be a program. So they call it CARP, and you can imagine what the logo looks like. But it's been really great to be able to see what we've been able to do over sort of the past 5 years or so with young people, and to try to. There's no question that there's an aging of the hobby. You had explosive growth in the 1950s in terms of ARRL membership. You had nearly explosive growth during the 1970s. It could have been much better if we hadn't looked down our noses at CBeers. We probably could have dramatically grown the hobby, but we're radio snobs, right? So we looked down our noses at them and sort of drove them away. But when you look at those people that were, hot and heavy in the 1950s coming into amateur radio and ARRL, a lot of them aren't around anymore. I came in, I was licensed in 1977 when I was in high school. So I'm in that 1970s bubble, so we're now in our 60s. And, going into the early 70s, that sort of age range. Beyond those two big bubbles in the demographics of the hobby, it is a frightening look back at a very, very small population. And the question is if we take the remainder, assuming that the board lets me keep my job for the next 7 years, we'll see how that goes, right? But if you look at the 10, I tell my management staff, I'm here for 10 years. That's 10 steps we take together. We're just about to complete the third step. I've only got 7 more steps to take with this team. What are we going to have accomplished at the end of those 10 steps together? And what will our legacy have been in terms of not just growing the hobby, taking away CW, big deal. So we took away CW and we put up big numbers, 52% of all licensed hams are techs. And what percentage of all techs are active? A very small number. We get a lot of people, you go and you take a look at, go in QRZ and look in your local town. You see mom and dad and sister and brother, all licensed, all at the same time, all with consecutive call signs. You think those guys are on the air now that little Billy's got his scouting badge? Nope. So there's 4 people that are in the FCC database that they have no interest, no passion, no nothing in amateur radio. They got their tech licenses and they moved on. So we have an awful lot of work to do to get more younger people interested in the hobby, making it their hobby, getting past the spark gap, CW, sideband's going to kill ham radio, incentive licensing, destroyed ham radio. I mean, the list of all the things that's destroyed ham radio is it's an impressive list, but we really need to get past that so that as we look back at the legacy of this generation of ARRL headquarters managers, we can say that we were able to, sort of elevate those younger ranks in the hobby.
David, I want to take you back 3 years, just briefly. You had mentioned that when you started, there was this sense from staff that they're just waiting for the next shoe to drop. I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean that they were used to a culture of cost cutting and people losing their job? What did that mean by the next shoe dropping?
It really had to do with the CEOs. You had a very, very long-term CEO who had retired, Dave Sumner, and was here over 30 years, right? And a new CEO came in, lasted for a year. It was his decision to leave. There were some things that he did not like. You were asking the question before about for-profit versus not-for-profit. I will tell you personally that the boards that I've worked with in for-profit organizations have a singular mindset. And what is it? make money? What do we need to do to make this company successful? I will tell you now, working for this nonprofit, that is not the way that our board was functioning back then. Today, you have 15 directors. Are all 15 directors holding hands and on the same page with each other? No. But are 11 or 12 of them? Yes. So, can the organization, can the membership look critically at the directors that serve them and say, is this individual really doing something for our division? Are they really doing something for amateur radio? Or rather, are they looking at the organization and amateur radio through a lens of self-interest, right? And conflict comes out because you've got a bunch of people trying to do the right thing. And then, you've got other people that are looking at how they want ARRL and amateur radio to be in their own mind. There is having discord and discussion, disagreement, and having a constructive discussion is one thing. Having destructive behavior, destructive decisions, trying to be pursued, that winds up impacting the mindset of, in this case, this particular CEO. He'd had enough, so he left. So then the CFO became the interim CEO until another CEO was hired. That CEO came in. There were some miscues in the beginning. He made some, I'll just say, a couple of PR mistakes that did not go well for him. Plus, my observation, he never developed a relationship with the board. And I don't know what his experience is. My experience with boards is you have to develop a strong relationship with them because they're there to help. In the for-profit world, when you work with a board member, the thing that they bring to the table more than anything else is their Rolodex. They give you resources. They connect you to solutions that you would not find on your own. I will tell you, we have a director Kristen McIntyre, one of the smartest human beings you'll ever meet. She works for Apple. She and I were having a conversation. I was telling her some of the challenges we were having with the VMware environment that I had inherited. And she connected us to some really smart people inside VMware. And they were able to help us dramatically, way better than if we had gone out and hired a consultant and trained the person on our environment and all that. Like, these are the guys that write the software. So they know the insides and outs of VMware. She opened her Rolodex to us. That is exactly how, to me, an effective relationship with a board member works. When I came in as CEO, I told the board that I was taking the door off my office. They had access to whatever they wanted. They could talk to me. They could ask me questions. I keep pretty good records. So if you see that there are people that are out in the world that maybe used to be a director here and make claims, I will tell you that the claims are generally incomplete or utterly false, and they're well documented. So being able to work very closely with the board, I will tell you that your director, Fred Kemmerer, is the hardest working director there is. The guy is completely selfless. He throws himself at everything. He brings his executive consulting chops to the board. And, some people are uncomfortable with that because they're not accustomed to working with somebody that works that hard, on a board. And I've said to Fred, as far as I'm concerned, he has unfettered access to the people in this building. I would never, ever doubt his intentions. His intentions are pure. He wants the best for ARRL and the best for amateur radio. So the staff, looking at the changes that have happened since I've come on board, they don't see a CEO who is in some kind of conflict with the board. There isn't this sort of undercurrent of people worried about what the board is doing or what's going to happen, or, is the CEO going to leave in a week? All of that is gone. And so by bringing that stability and that strength in relationship between the CEO and the board to bear, employees can see that it's business as usual. Come to work, serve the members. Hopefully you can leave at the end of the day with a smile, and come back the next day and do it all over again.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. Thank you. One of the things you began the conversation with was this idea that no was the answer and we needed to move to yes, which speaks to responsiveness, correct? I was really impressed recently to get a survey from the ARRL. I thought it was very well done, very thorough. I filled it out diligently, sent it back right away. But then I was even more impressed to just in the last couple of days get a summary of what that was about. So talk about transparency. I really, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to offer my opinion, but certainly really appreciate seeing what everybody else had to say. The two things that I really took away from that I thought were a surprise to me. First of all, it seemed as though, I'm not sure if it was a majority, but a great number of people were okay with the membership dues increase, which I actually am an advocate of. So I was pleasantly surprised to read that. The other thing that really surprised me was how much people enjoy the print edition of QST. Could you speak to, well, you can speak to the summary, but speak to those 2 points specifically, please, David.
Sure. So the idea behind doing the summary was, one of the changes that we've made internally is to the culture is one of collaboration. So it's not unusual to come in and see a fairly eclectic group of 4 or 5 people sitting around a table trying to come up with a solution to a problem. And that power of collaboration, I believe that when you collaborate, you get to better solutions. And it would be arrogant to sit back and think that making all the decisions by yourself, or even take a look at software. I said in a column recently, you take a look at N1MM, the logging software, you take a look at what Joe Taylor, right, a Nobel Prize winner from Princeton, has achieved with WSJT. This was a collaborative effort. This isn't a guy sitting in a bunker someplace writing code. This is a group of people that are coming up with better solutions. So the idea was, let's survey the membership. Let's give everybody the opportunity to chime in and see where their heads are at, right? Because you hear a lot anecdotally. It's funny, is statistically, after we cleared about 1,200 surveys, the statistics didn't change. We had sort of nailed the mindset of the membership, and it was really gratifying over the fullness of time to where we got over 20,000. And I got to tell you, for this community to get 20,000, there are people in this building doing cartwheels. They can't believe that it's huge, right? So there's a couple things, right? That in the past, when ARRL has done a dues increase, it's been something that people have done with their, holding their nose. They haven't talked about it. They just did it. It got out there. People got teed off and walked away from ARRL for a while, a year or two, and then they came back because they missed their magazine. I mean, if you look on a whole, it's sort of childish behavior, right? It's like, I didn't get my way, so I'm going to hold my breath. Well, okay, but you're not going to kill yourself. It's like, come on, man. But so in any event, being able to go to the members and saying, look, here's a whole range of potential dollar amounts. Where do you think from your perspective, where do you think we should be with dues? We raised dues twice in 22 years. Again, you and I are talking about coming from a for-profit environment. Nobody does that, right? Anybody that runs a business knows that if on average your expenses are going up 3% a year, I mean, they don't need Warren Buffett to teach them how compound interest works. At some point, you're going to get yourself into big trouble. So we had to address the dues, and we wanted to see where people's heads were at. Now, the other thing is that printing a paper magazine is becoming increasingly difficult. It's not just about the dollars. A lot of well, there's not even that many anymore, but when you take a look at the companies that are processing pulp and that pulp is turning into product, the product that these mills are using pulp for are largely corrugated boxes. Amazon's through the roof, Walmart with their through the roof. One of the biggest internet sellers that I don't even think people realize how big these guys are is QVC. QVC's got a monstrous internet business, corrugate, all boxes, right? Just look at what you used to recycle 20 years ago, right? When recycling was sort of in its infancy, you'd put out a stack of newspapers and magazines and you'd tie it up with some twine. Today, it's a huge container full of layers and layers of crushed up cardboard boxes from all the Amazon purchases he made. So for us to be able to get paper in the color and the quality and even the size on the roll, all of those things have become increasingly limited. It's getting more difficult and more expensive for us to print a magazine. The best way to deal with it, frankly, because we're a technology community. There are a lot of people, myself included, who likes to read QST on a digital device. But there are people that want their magazines. They want their printed magazines. There's got to be a way that we can service the needs of some without taxing the many. And the way to do that and what we're looking at, we're talking about it. No decisions have been made, right? Nothing's been voted on. But one of the solutions that we're looking at is we know we need to raise dues. We haven't raised dues. We've raised it twice in, 22, 23 years. You can't run a business. You can run a business that way. You run it straight into the ground, right? And for the last 4 years, ARRL has been operating in a budgetary deficit. Now it got a 2-year pass with COVID, right? There was a PPP loan that was forgiven. There was another incentive given by the government in terms of keeping staff employed during that period of time. We didn't do any travel. We weren't going to shows. What used to be all in-person meetings, like our executive committee meetings and all the rest of it, almost every single one of them is done on Zoom today, and with much greater frequency. Executive committee used to be twice a year. Now it can meet any time that it wants to. So as we look at this sort of digital transformation of ARRL, we need to be able to support the financial needs of the business with a dues increase. The other piece, we have 4 magazines. 2 of them today, all 4 you get as a member digitally. But if you want NCJ or QEX, you have to pay for it. You get to pick QST or on the air. And if you pick QST and you want on the air, it's like another $40 for on the air. So one of the things that we've looked at is because the number of people that want the printed magazine is going down, because the costs of the supply chain in the print area have become more difficult to manage. And in the fullness of time, and when I say fullness of time, it could be 10 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 20 years. I don't know the answer. But what I do know, looking out at the world of print magazines are going away. At some point in time, having printed magazines in any organization is going to be unsustainable. But for today, if you want printed QST, if you want printed on the air, if you want to continue getting printed QEX or NCJ, you should pay for it. And there will be some people who will go bananas and say, oh, this is a bait and switch. You took the dues up. Now you're charging me for QST. That's not it at all. You've got to be able to run the business, and you've got to be able to continue to fund the printing of a magazine that not everybody wants to receive in print. When we put out the survey, there were many people that came back and switched their subscription from paper to digital because they don't need the paper QST. They read it digitally like I do. So, that's really sort of where those two elements are with the survey and with the sort of impending restructuring of our dues.
David, one last unrelated question. I've had the impression in the past that the ARRL has looked at mergers, acquisitions, trying to provide more value for ham radio operators by kind of getting involved with the business of business. Is that the case? And if so, what's on the horizon?
So, one of the questions that I asked members not long after I started was, what do you think ARRL should be doing to promote and protect amateur radio? And one of the answers that came back from a number of folks had to do with things that they were specifically interested in that they were scared were going to go away. And they wanted ARRL to provide some kind of a runway for a soft landing for whatever that business was so that it wouldn't go away and they could continue to depend on it. Well, there's a couple of realities here. The first one is a guy who I have a tremendous amount of respect for is Scott Robbins at Vibraplex. I'm a long time Vibraplex owner. I'm a collector. If I turned my laptop around and showed you the shelves in the bookcase in my office is covered with keys. And what Scott's been doing, and he's been really astute at it, is he's been looking at brands within amateur radio and curating a portfolio of brands that people didn't want to see go away. Perfect example, Bencher. A lot of people, when they first got into using paddles for CW, they used the Bencher BY1, right? The black base. And then in the fullness of time, they may upgrade to, a fancier one, like the gold base or the black base with the gold hardware. So Scott has been out in the world looking at brands within amateur radio. MFJ did the same thing. You take a look at the work that Martin has done in terms of, Cushcraft and Ameritron and Mirage. He curated a portfolio of companies. So the question is that ARRL's role? And the answer is mixed. In some cases, the answer is yes. If there are businesses in sort of the educational, publishing, the things that are sort of closer to our knitting, we definitely would look at those things and want to acquire them. And it's to bolster the offering for members. And it's for us to be able to provide a higher quality set of products and services. So the answer to that is yes. At the same time, we've had some critics in terms of some of the hardware that we've sold over the years. There were people that didn't think that we should have gotten involved with MFJ on the Cub. I had a director ask me when I announced that we were going to be selling a end-fed half-wave kit, ask me what expert did I go to conclude that this was the right thing for ARRL to do. And, when he first said it, I thought it was kind of funny, but, it was a challenge. And the challenge is that there are companies that are out there selling these antennas. Do we want to be perceived as competing against them? No, we're not selling a final product. We're selling you a kit. We want you to go through the steps of building that antenna, watching our videos, looking in our antenna book. We want you to learn what happens with an end-fed half-wave antenna. What's the magic? How's it work? We've sold 5,000 of those antennas. So people, we're excited about the fact that, that members want to build those kits. And that was one of the questions in the survey, right? Do you want us to be bringing out more things like, like kits and projects and so forth?
And as I recall, people were pretty positive about that. They did want it.
It was a monstrous, resounding yes. So again, to answer your question, it's a yes and no kind of thing. It's got to be close to the mission at hand. But if it's too commercial, if I can use that expression, we would probably look to the Vibraplexes, MFJs. Look at what DX Engineering is doing. The same kind of thing. They're really curating an amazing portfolio of brands. And I think in some cases, they're actually buying the brand or buying the IP to manufacture the antennas for themselves. So, that's not something that we want to get involved in.
David, I could talk to you for another hour, and I see by the clock here, I've already taken up much more of your time than I had promised. I hope you'll come back and continue conversations with me because there's so many more directions to go in. But I really appreciate your time today. I've learned a lot about the ARRL, and I thought I'd done my research before. Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope you come back.
I would be happy to come back. There's, I tell people when they ask, can you speak at our event? I'll say yes. And they'll say, how much time do you need? And I said, well, I could talk for 4 hours about all the good stuff going on at ARRL, but, like I did with you, let's sort of put a fence around it because there's, amateur radio is a hobby of hobbies. ARRL services a very vast and diverse group of people. It's a small community. It's a community where we really have to support each other. I will tell you, there is really absolutely no value in bashing each other. Young people see it. People who are sort of on the fringe of the hobby that are half foot in, half foot out kind of thing. We drive those people away when we do that. At ARRL, the culture that we're trying to drive in the hobby is one of positivity. We don't want to get down in the mud and start slinging. We want to stay 100 miles away from that and try to put a positive outlook to amateur radio and folks like you that are taking the initiative to create content and an audience. You're going to find in the fullness of time your own audience. I know you interviewed Jason at Ham Radio 2.0, a guy with a monstrous channel, right? But in the fullness of time, you're going to develop a community that trusts you and trusts the content that you curate. And I would be more than happy to be a part of that.
I've been talking to David Minster, NA2AA, the CEO of ARRL. If you're not a member, I encourage you to become a member. Check out what they're doing, offer your feedback, volunteer where you can. They're a phenomenal organization. We wouldn't have the hobby we have without them. Thanks again, David. Have a great day.
Thank you.